Hey there, game show. I'm back again this week with another shorter kind of thought, a vloggy type thing. Anyway, I wanted to talk about some of the changes that have been going on for the PC distribution platform Steam. You might have noticed that you might have bought some games on Steam. You probably have. It's one of the largest, I think it is, it's the largest digital distribution platform for games in the entire world. It's broken into countries in Eastern Europe where piracy is a problem. The CEO of Valve Software, Gabe Newell, has talked a lot about Steam. And actually, a couple of years ago, I heard him talk at the DICE conference, and there's something that he said that really stuck out for me. He said, in the future, we won't really need game critics because you will be more likely to trust your friends for their opinion of what it is to play than you would be to trust, some game website or some other source, right, other than the person that you know. And here we are. In the last week or so, there's been a big update to Steam, specifically the rollout of some personalized discovery that'll show you what games you might like based on games that you've played, a wish list, as well as the introduction of something that I want to talk about, the Steam Curator system. So the way it works is like Steam Curators. If you have a Steam group, you can create a curators page, or if you have like a YouTube channel or something like that, you can create a curators page as well. But the idea is to sort of leverage the individual value of experts to give you recommendations for what it is that you want to play. And if you look at the Steam Curators page, you'll see a lot of familiar faces, people like Total Biscuit, Jim Sterling, Kotaku, Rock Paper Shotgun. These are all like kind of known entities that have existed not just on Steam but in other places online for quite some time. Valve has said that curators will be highlighted based on the number of followers that they have, though ostensibly that might change over time. So there's a couple things that seem like kind of apparent at this point. First and foremost, that the list of curators kind of needs curation. In fact, two of the two top curators right now have the same exact game that they're recommending. So if the goal of Steam curators is to sort of direct people to things that are undiscovered or things that you might not know about, it seems like someone needs to actually cull the number of curators. Otherwise, how will you know who you're supposed to be following in the first place? But I think this raises for me this like larger question, which is something that's beleaguered other digital distribution platforms for quite some time. It's this larger question of like, why does Steam as a company need to curate at all? So there's almost 4,000 games on Steam on that point. Compare that to 1.2 million on the iOS App Store, and certainly a much larger number for Google Store as well. I think the desire for curation it's a pretty natural one. You want to, I think if you create something, a tool for people to use, you want to sort of guarantee that they're using it for ostensibly the right things. Andy Bio, who's a technologist, he runs the XOXO Festival in Portland, wrote an amazing piece specifically re-envisioning what social discovery might look like for the iOS App Store. You can check out that piece. I'll link to it in the description. But he's lamenting a common concern, which is like people don't know what to play. So that seems to be the main driving force in terms of introducing personalized discovery on Steam, but more specifically the Steam Curators program, which is this idea that if you don't know what to play, there's somebody else out there who might be able to help you. But I think it's a little bit bigger than that in the sense that I think there's this sense that we're not playing the right games, that there are these undiscovered gems on Steam that just aren't rising to the top, and that they need a little kick from somebody to give them a little bump up the charts. Traditionally, that was a role that was filled by critics. There's an excellent piece by Chuck Klosterman in Esquire from almost 10 years ago, where he asked why there was no Lester Bangs of video games. Lester Bangs was a very influential music critic from the 60s and 70s, and he wanted to know why there wasn't a person who had that kind of critical dominance, the ability to sway public opinion, to sort of move people en masse to enjoy a particular piece of media. The way it's existed in film, the way it's existed in television, the way it's existed in music. And one of the things he says in the piece is that he's starting to suspect that there will never be the kind of authoritative critical voice within the world of video games, which is interesting for a lot of reasons that he outlines. And certainly, at some level, it certainly seems like the idea that people aren't playing the right games or are not getting the right recommendations. It certainly seems like that at times. That was something that was crowed recently in Slate by David Auerbach, where he declared that gaming journalism, as we know it, is basically over. And I think that certainly the move to introduce curators into the system is part of this larger conversation around how do people ostensibly play the right games? Well, one thing that I think we should reconsider is this idea that there is such thing as the right games. More specifically, that good games will sort of rise to the top. There's an amazing study that was done by Duncan Watts, who was who previously at Princeton University. Now he's a researcher at Microsoft. He did this incredible study. I encourage you to read it. It's called An Experimental Study of Inequality and Unpredictability in an Artificial Cultural Market. So in the study, he kind of asked this question. He's saying that hit songs, books, movies are many times more successful than average, right? So Lady Gaga or something. But the best alternatives, this would suggest that the best alternatives are qualitatively different from the rest. There's something about really good things that make them rise to the top. Yeah, a lot of times experts routinely fail to predict which products will succeed. This happens from time to time. Critics pan a game that ends up, or pan a game, or dismiss an artist or whatever it might be, and that person ends up being huge. So what Duncan Watts and his research team did something really cool. They created an artificial music market in which over 14,000 participants downloaded previously unknown songs, either with or without knowledge of previous participants' choices. And what they found was that no one really knows what hits are. Every time that they ran the experiment, the top songs in that cohort ended up being different every single time, and they really wanted to understand why. Just to give you some, it's basically as if there were these alternate universes where the Billboard chart was different every single week. But one of the things that he found was that the strength of social influence increased both inequality and unpredictability of success. That basically talking to other people, engaging with other people, increased the gap between have and have-nots in terms of like who really succeeds and who doesn't, and also who actually wins in the first place. And he introduces this idea there known as information cascades, which is a term that social scientists use for collective decision-making, where one person will pass information to another person, and then that person will tell another person, and so on and so forth. This already was happening on Steam, where popular games continue to be really popular, and then Steam would promote them, and then they would sort of continue their dominance. But you're actually already starting to see it with the Steam Curators program, in which people who are already successful, curators who are already successful in ecosystems outside of Steam itself, like YouTube, for example, or they can, they run their own website. Those are the people who are now starting to have the largest voices in terms of directing people to what games they should ostensibly play. So here's the thing that you should understand. Steam curation ultimately has nothing to do with finding good games. It has everything to do with building community, specifically a community of like-minded folks. Back to Gabe Newell's point earlier, this idea that the friends, the people that you self-select to be your closest advisors, confidants, etc., those are the people who should be influencing your purchasing decisions. But in any case, it's all good news for Steam because it allows them to sell more games. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for individual creators. What I'm saying is that this idea that there are these hidden gems that are out there, these hidden independent game gems that need curation or personal discovery to rise to the top, I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case. I think in a lot of ways you'll see the same dynamics that play out before, which is, some people will get lucky and sell a lot of games, and everybody else will just have to, wait it out. Remember, Steam's job is ultimately to sell games. It doesn't really matter to them whether or not the right games are being sold, or even if the best ones critically are being sold. It might matter internally to them as a company, but it has no bearing on its success as a digital discovery platform. The most important thing for them is making sure that you buy lots of games and making sure that you're able to access them. The longer trajectory is that it makes a lot of sense for them to distance themselves from a process of suggesting, taking a normative assessment, assigning a set of values to particular games and saying, oh, these are the ones that you should be playing, because it's really exhausting. It's worth noting, if you look at other alternate examples outside of games, the opposite approach has pretty much been taken, which is hyper-personalization. This idea that there's this infinite breadth of content on sites like Netflix or Pandora, and their approach has been, we know we have almost everything in the ocean, so let's just create something hyper-personal, which is in a lot of ways anti-communal, because it says that what's most important is your opinion. We can understand who you are as a person based on past things that you've chosen. That's why Netflix spends so much money trying to tweak their algorithm to make sure you're getting the right recommendations. So, does this mean that critics ultimately won't have a place in games? Of course not. But the Steam Curators program is different from Curation in almost every single way. One, there's no money that changes hands. Curators are often paid for their services. There's no cap on the number of games that you suggest. And in fact, some of the Steam Curation pages have already gotten quite long. There's not a lot of space for you to really, aside from like a short little blurb, for you to be able to recommend things. I think the bigger piece is that the goal, there's no challenge in the sense that the goal of an actual curator is sometimes to challenge its patrons, not necessarily to be the most popular. So all I'm saying is I think that we should be clear about what it is that's happening in a place like Steam. Simply that I don't think that we're going to see a world where all of a sudden these undiscovered gems are going to be rising to the top. But I do think it speaks to a much larger movement, which is to allow community-driven, which I applaud, certainly applaud Steam for, which is to allow people's community decisions to influence the things that they ultimately buy. On the flip side, it does bum me out a little bit in the sense that I do think that there is and will always be a role for the unexpected, that there will always be blind spots, there will always be things that we don't necessarily see, we don't know, and that will ultimately that we should play. My hope is that people like me and other people will continue to sort of fill the role as independent curators, and that will eventually influence the way people buy things in the future. All right, thanks so much. I'll see you next week.